I'm inspired. I'm inspired.
Hey there guys, how's it going? My name is Sumit Chatterjee from the Flow Zone Academy, and I'm a flow state coach, which means that I help you feel better and perform better. Today I'm talking about what are my opinions of death, what happens after death, what's going on here. Now this is a question that every single philosopher and person who explores their own psyche starts to really ponder. I think as children we start to get worried a lot too. Like, I remember this time when I went up to my mother when I was very, very young. Maybe I was like 9 years old. And I started crying and telling her, what will happen to me after you die? What will happen to me after I die? Like, this annihilation or this fear of the death, which is actually the death of the ego, in a sense, right? And when you're a child, you're actually formulating the ego, so you're fearing this loss, but we also get closer towards this thing as we get older as well, right? So this idea of the Stoic principle of memento mori has been very, very powerful for me. Whereas a lot of people get scared of death, the Stoics believe that once you remember your death, it actually gives you more life. It actually gets you to live life fully every single day because you don't know when it's going to be gone, right? So in that same way, I really like to approach death from a perspective that is a lot more positive and empowering than a lot of people make it out to be. A lot of people take death and they don't want to talk about it like it's a taboo subject, or they're scared to really talk about grief or even loss. And I think it's a very truthful experience. I think Ram Dass said it best when he said that when somebody's dying, it's the most truthful that they're gonna get, because they just can't deny that fact. They can't get away from that truth. And I think that's somewhat bittersweet. You know, I think there's something about that example of death being associated with rigidity and stagnancy, but also stagnancy is certainty, right, in that same sense. So, you know, death is a certainty in life. You know, that's one thing that we can count on for sure, and it's this understanding that when you die, you know, what happens to you after you die. There's a lot of different beliefs of life after death. Now, particularly when I watched the movie Enter the Void, I considered that example of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and, you know, looking at that example exactly and what that means. Do we end up floating around as a consciousness, you know, looking at our life in purgatory until we find a new host or a body that we go into to be reborn again? I mean, hey, that's one idea, right? Reincarnation. However, I'm going to give you a perspective that's very interesting. Have you ever heard of the cartoonist Ramin Nazar? Now, this guy's one of my favorite cartoonists of all time, and I don't say that very lightly because I like a lot of different cartoonists, but I think that Ramin Nazar really, really finds a way to epitomize his own spiritual experience through these comics and cartoons that are just so unique, a different perspective completely, and completely empowering as well. So he has this comic book called After You Die, okay? I'm not going to go through it all, but I'll give you little chunks in this video. So first of all, he says oblivion. Then he says heaven, hell, purgatory, reincarnate, ghost, resonate, wake up like it was all a dream, repeat, a new game, a simulation, live in your child's mind, a surprise party, dimension shift, huh? You never die, paradox, okay? And specifically the last one is interesting. I want to read this one out. Paradox. All of the previously mentioned models are simultaneously true and untrue. You are already dead. You are alive eternally. The past and future don't exist, and never did. There is only now. Oof, that brings me chills. But yeah, instead of looking at death as this end result or this end goal in a sense, or this end, full stop in the video game, like a checkpoint that you reach, Instead, I see it as a transformation, right? It's a transit station towards something, and I don't know what that something is. We can't know for sure, or we can only postulate and think of different ideas about it. But I think it's helped me to understand that as we grow older, we get wrinkles, and maybe those wrinkles signify that we're wrinkling out of our bodies into a soul. And I think the death, and hey, this might seem optimistic, this may even be a coping thing where I'm like, hey, death is like, you know, this place, this magical place that we go to. I mean, it does soothe the ego to hear that, right? It does soothe us as people to know that there is some place out there that is, you know, a safe haven. Because how would we live our lives differently now? I think personally it's important for us to embody this idea of heaven on earth, right? And truly live through that. I know it might seem like an impossibility, but I've always believed in superimposing a positive, bright world on top of a dark one. Like, I've always loved that idea of just being able to live in my own reality, and that's based on my perception and how I see it. And how I treat the subject of death is how I'm going to encounter death. And I don't know, it might come to me as a surprise, right? And a lot of people, you know, they hear of death and they treat this character death, even the guy like the Grim Reaper with the scythe, as this bad character. Like, nobody actually respects the Grim Reaper, you know? Everyone's like, man, that guy's there to take me away. But I think it's a powerful imagery when we start to get down to it. Because down to it is really it. Like, what if there was an underworld? You know, what if there were things there outside of our control? What if there were dimensions that we couldn't see? What if? We can postulate all we want, but we've got to understand how death helps us to live now. Because the worst thing, even worse than death, I believe, is not having lived now. Being dead already now, but not truly living. Being a zombie, being rigid, being stagnant, being stuck in one place. And honestly, another thing is like sleeping all the time. You know, I think that we're not here to sleep all the time. I think that we're here to do things. We're here to take action steps. We're here to make a change in this world. We're here to take our frequency and make the world better. However, it's got to come with some inner healing and some inner work. And a lot of that shadow work is death work. This is what this is, right? Confronting the fear of death and coming to terms with it. Because are you looking at it apathetically? Are you looking at it as a blind courage? Like, if you cross the road and you get hit by a car, you're like, yeah, I lived a good life or whatever, right? Or are you in fear of it, like, man, I didn't live at all to my fullest? Like, what is it going to be, right? Because this visualization, right? Doing this visualization of imagining yourself in a coffin and thinking about all the things that people would say about you and what would it be written on your gravestone, you know? Doing this visualization, I know it can be very scary for a lot of people to confront, especially if you're younger, to really think about this. And I think old people start to talk about this stuff, and it's irksome. It's really irksome, right? It's like maybe your father's like, hey, I wonder how I should design my coffin and stuff like that. And you're like, that's dark. Like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to really deal with that. Just like we have the topic of sex positivity, we're going to have to start to introduce this topic of death positivity. Because a lot of us were silent when it comes to death. And we don't give a diverse range of aftercare practices, after-death practices, you know. You know, the Zoroastrians, they have a temple where they put the dead bodies on the top of the temple. They used to do that, at least. They don't do that anymore, perhaps, but you know, it's just important considering that some people cremate and some people, you know, plant under the ground. And what is the significance of that, really? You know, here in India, you cremate the bodies. I mean, in some way, are we trying to become the elements? Does that make sense when I say that? Become the elements? Like, when you're going underground, do you become a part of the ground? When you cremate, you know, light the body on fire, do you become the fire? If you're drowning the body, in some accident in some way, does the body become a part of the water? You know, this is really important to think. Because our bodies, we have such an important connection and a conditioning to them. It's difficult to imagine ourselves without a body. I think our brains have something to do with right before death. I think that, when DMT is produced in the brain, it gets us to see that narrow vision of like heaven's arches in a sense, where we see a divine bright light. I think there's some science showing that there's an area of our brain that actually gets affected when it does that. I mean, again, it's the unknown, and what we really fear is the unknown. We don't fear death, we fear the unknown. Us as human beings, we always want to comprehend things. We want to get to the end point. We want closure. I think this is one of those topics that, if you even mention the word, a lot of people have different reactions to it. Like bodily reactions, mental reactions, spiritual reactions. And it's really important to consider everybody's perspective. How were they raised? How were they brought up talking about this topic? Were they at all talking about it? Have they repressed that fear of death their whole life? Have they understood it properly? So all these questions really get you to go on a bit of a rabbit hole to understand what really does happen. And, if I give you like one answer here in this video and you're like, yep, I agree with that, that's exactly what's going to happen. That's okay, but how is that helping you live right now? And I think Memento Mori sums it up in the best way. Just remember you're going to die, and the fact is, that memory of the fact that you're going to die, is like, it gives you more life, it makes you take more action. It gives you more vitality. It makes you more present and engaged and cherish every moment. It makes you cherish every single moment. It makes you stop and smell the flowers. And I think we get to learn that as we grow older. To truly, truly take the juice of life and really embrace every moment as if it were your last. To seize the day, as they say, carpe diem. And to understand that death is nothing more than a transformation. I mean, the way that I see it is that, you're just going from physical matter to metaphysical matter. It's all recycled. I'm in the belief of past lives. I think that is a possibility of that. Because, one of the experiences is that why are certain people, very drawn to ancient cultures and things like that, and they have no idea why. Right? Like if you've been really fascinated in history class by a specific, tribe, or like if you're really into ancient Egypt and you don't know why, or you're suddenly like, man, I'm really fascinated by Japanese culture and I don't even know where that's coming from, right? I feel that these are indicators of like there's something greater going on, right? Understand that life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Right, we have the long-term game, and we can plan and actually live the way that we want to. When we get into Savasana, for instance, after we do yoga, it's actually getting us to, experience that feeling of letting go. Because death is a letting go. It's not being attached to the physical body anymore. Right? So, I don't know how profound you want me to get in this video, but this is the way that I see it. I've evolved to see it like this. I haven't always seen it like this. As I've grown throughout my spiritual journey, I've gotten more accustomed to it. Maybe my opinion will change if I have a traumatic experience where I see it in front of my eyes. Of course, I have seen my grandparents pass away, God rest their souls, and I've had one of my best friends, I haven't seen him as that's happened, so it's never really happened face to face. The only time I remember is I accidentally killed a bird with a stone once when I was very young, like I was 9 years old, and that was a very shocking experience, but I had to go through that grieving and that process of getting a cardboard box and, burying it in my backyard when I was in Switzerland. And I do remember that the feeling that I got from that was this feeling of like shame and guilt and like apathy and grief and understanding and confronting, like that was another life, that was another life form. And, it's such a intense experience, right? For a lot of people, especially if you're young. Again, I just want to reiterate that. But it's one of those things that if you do it in the right way, if you process it with the right circumstances, with the right people, with the right vibe, you can overcome anything if you can overcome the fear of death. I hope this video helped you out today and gave you a new perspective, gave you a new pair of glasses to see the world. Have an amazing day. May the flow be with you and stay legendary. See you next time.